Thank you for coming. My name is Chris Farmer from UK Liberty. I did have a presentation prepared, but events have overtaken me. And I've just been watching something on the news from the House of Commons, where we've had our good friend, Mr. Jahawi, making a statement to the House of Commons this evening. And I'm just going to put it on because I think it speaks for itself. Stand by.
Trial, we have rolled out the NHS COVID pass. This allows people safely and securely to demonstrate their COVID status, whether it's proof of vaccination status, test results, or natural immunity. People will also be able to demonstrate proof of a negative test result. Although we don't encourage its use in essential settings like supermarkets, other businesses and organisations in England can adopt the pass as a means of entry where it's suitable for their venue or premises, and when they can see its potential to keep their clients or their customers safe. But for proprietors of venues and events where large numbers are likely to gather and likely to mix with people from outside their households for prolonged periods, deploying the pass is the right thing to do. The pass has an important role to play in slowing the spread of the virus, and so we reserve the right to mandate its use in the future. Next, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to update the House on vaccination as a condition of entry. At the end of September, we plan to make full vaccination a condition of entry to those high-risk settings where large crowds gather and interact. As a condition of entry to these venues, people will need to show that they are fully vaccinated, and proof of a negative test will no longer be sufficient.
Look, like I said before, this to me is a declaration of war on the public. This is an out.
Thank you. That last voice was the voice of Hugo from Hugo Talks. This is just an astounding state of affairs. We've gone in 1.5 years from flatten the curve for 3 weeks so that we can get ready the NHS to effectively show me your papers before you leave your house. We have a separate, or these people are intending to separate out that large minority of people who absolutely refuse, for whatever reason, to take an untested medical procedure against their will, which doesn't have its full licenses, and for the long-term effects have not been verified nor checked because they've gone through no trials, and they are insisting that we have it or else. Now, this has now become almost a nightmare because we are now being told that we won't be able to go to churches, we won't be able to go to clubs. And don't think it will stop there, because once they've identified, quotes, places where people are likely to gather, that means outside your house. If you're going to say that you can't go to anywhere where people are likely to gather, that means as soon as you go out your front door, you are in a place where people are likely to gather. So they will be telling people that they are no longer citizens of the UK and they cannot access maybe hospitals or maybe libraries or any access to anywhere where there may be other people, unless they can prove they are, quotes, safe and they got COVID vaccines inside them. I don't really like to call them vaccines because they're not proper vaccines. They are not vaccines in the true sense of the word, because they are more technical than that. A true vaccine is an attenuated version of the original disease, and this mRNA thing is not a true vaccine. But that's another question. Whether this is a vaccine or not is not the issue. Now we are talking about a dystopian statist regime that is telling you what you can and can't do, and on pain of being segregated from the rest of society. Now, this person tells lies. Just a couple of months ago, this same person was asked about vaccine passports, and they use their time-worn phrase, "We don't plan to." They never say they won't. They say at the moment we have no plans to. But then he went on a little bit further to say it would be discriminatory, and it's not the way we do things here in the United Kingdom. We believe in consensus. That's what this guy said 6 months ago. And now he's standing up in the House of Commons telling us what is going to happen to us unless we comply. Well, I've had enough of this terrible injustice. I believe that Hugo is right. This is a declaration of war. This is a violation of all common law. This is a violation of all moral standards. It's a violation of human rights. I've got some of the human rights in front of me here. I only need one of them, which is the Article 14 of the Human Rights Act, is the right to be free from discrimination. Well, this is an exact example of discrimination. You're being discriminated against unless you do as you're told and have this double jab. They can't do this. It's a violation of the Human Rights Act, which they have lined themselves up with. These people are absolutely terrible and they must be fought tooth and nail. Whether you believe in COVID is what it is, or whether you don't believe what it's said to be. This is a separate issue. This is your freedom under the law to live your own life according to your own values. And personal protection of your own health is up to you. It isn't up to the government to tell you what you can and cannot do when it comes to medications. I'm so angry. There's a protest on Saturday in London, and I think it's not the only one. I think there's protests in Manchester. Now, I've never protested in my life. I've never marched because I always feel that, on one hand, I think they are, you're talking to people who already think like you do. If you're standing in a march with 3,000 other people, all the other 2,099 are on your side of the line. So I always think that you should argue the case with people who don't agree with you. And so I would normally resist going on a march, but this is beyond the pale. And I think that now is the time to not be an armchair warrior, but to get up and start marching, because I think we are getting to this point where this government is actually not of the people, by the people and for the people. It's not working for us. It is actually imposing what is going to be a dictatorship. Look how far they've come in the last couple of years. I'm off my script because I'm not using a script. I prepared a script. Let's just go through my script. This is the one I prepared earlier. It's out of date now, but let's just look at it anyway. This is what I was going to say before I said all of that. We can prove that the government are liars on principle. How? Because all liars do three things. They distort the meanings of words, they make contradictory statements, and they do not act in accordance with their own professed beliefs. All liars do this, you see. So just look at that list again. Liars distort meanings of words, they make contradictory statements, and they do not act in accordance with their professed beliefs. They say one thing, but they do the opposite, and we've already mentioned an example of that. But the government have been doing this for years. Let's have a look at this. Liars distort the meanings of words. For example, the term COVID death. Now, if you were just a normal human being, you'd expect the word COVID death to mean a death caused by COVID, but that's not what it means. A COVID death means a death with COVID, not of COVID. So a COVID death has been defined as any death that takes place within 28 days of a positive COVID test. Now, this small change of wording from with rather than from, you die with COVID rather than from COVID, seems such a small grammatical change that it wouldn't make any difference, but it really does, because a lot of people die with their shoes on, but that doesn't mean their shoes killed them. And a lot of people die having had their dinner. They have their dinner and then they drop dead. It doesn't mean that their dinner killed them. Now, this error is called the cause correlation fallacy, where you are correlating to saying this correlates with this in time, and therefore one is cause of the other. Now, sometimes that correlation is correct. If you put your hand in the fire, you pretty quickly feel a burn. And then you say, well, the two things are correlated, one is causing the other. But this is an error because it's not necessarily so. It's a well-known violation of the principle of correct scientific inference, which is this cause correlation fallacy. Having terms of XYZ died after having contracted COVID implies a causal relationship which just doesn't exist. Now, these sage scientists, they know about this stuff. They know about the logical fallacies of cause correlation. And if they were real scientists, they would never fall into that trap. They know about this, and yet they're violating their own procedures. They're not real scientists. I'll say that again. These people who claim to be sage scientists are not acting the way science is due to act. Fake scientists purposefully misuse grammar, and they know it. They knowingly commit logical fallacies in order to create false impressions. And sage are doing that. They're giving us ample evidence to suggest that they are dangerous frauds. The next thing that the liars do is they contradict themselves. Shakespeare said, to be or not to be, that is the question. Aristotle said, nothing can at the same time both be affirmed and denied of the same subject. So a thing either is or it is not X. He said, no principle is more certain than this. And yet we see contradictory statements practically every day. So, for example, we had our so-called Freedom Day on Monday, but on the very same day that we were given our freedoms, Boris flagged up the COVID passport, which is the anti-freedom. Now, you can't have Freedom Day and anti-freedom in the same message. He says you're free, but provided you do, you're free to do exactly what we tell you to do. Effectively, that's a contradictory message. Freedom means you don't have to do what other people tell you to do. You can live according to your own mind. But Boris's version of freedom is you are free to do exactly and only what we tell you to do. Otherwise, you're sanctioned. It's exactly the same message that Macron has given to the French, and that's why the French are rioting in Paris this evening. What is a Boris promise worth to you, by the way? Do you remember this phrase from Boris Johnson? It will be an irreversible roadmap to freedom. He was saying that at the beginning of the year, the irreversible but cautious roadmap. And then a couple of weeks ago, he changed irreversible to what I hope will be an irreversible. So he dropped it down a level. And now he's saying that I can't guarantee that it will be an irreversible roadmap. In other words, a Boris promise is worth zero. It's nothing. It's just hot air and wind. Liars do not act in accordance with their professed beliefs. Liars say one thing and do the opposite. I've just given you the example. Our good friend, the Minister of State, told us that they wouldn't do it because they didn't actually say that, did he? Because they're careful. They say we have no plans to do this. We have no current plans, because they know that they can make up a plan any minute they like. So the terminology, again, they use language and grammar very carefully. It's called rhetoric, not logic, but rhetoric. They study how to mince words. So we said, look, this is an example. Everyone knows this example. Now, do you think that Matt actually believes in the danger of COVID when he's got his tongue down his girlfriend's throat? I shouldn't think so. He's doing that because he knows that the deadly advice that he's been given to other people isn't true. So he violates his own schedules. Look at this picture. The Queen is in her 90s. This is from the G7. The Queen is in her 90s. And they are all violating every rule that we insist that we live on. I don't know how old Prince Charles is. He's not a young man, is he? He must be 75, something like that. But they are, or maybe 70. But they are all violating their own rules because they know that it's not as dangerous as they've been telling us it is. The government shows every sign of being corrupt, and they show zero sign of being honest. Now, that wouldn't normally matter. You might know some corrupted people, and it doesn't really matter because the average person doesn't have the power that a government minister has. The government shows every sign of being corrupt, and they show zero sign of being honest. Now, that wouldn't matter, but it does when these people are government ministers, because it's the government who is the only group in society that are empowered to use the threat of laws and fines and imprisonment and physical force, as we have seen this evening, threatening the sanction of the law, to impose their will on us. Now, this is what happens when you don't do as you're told. The police come in and they use, it's called the police force. I joined the police. I was in the police for 10 years, and I was very proud to serve as a police officer. But we are called the police force. We are the only agency, with certain other exceptions like the customs and the prison officers who can use physical force lawfully. And this is why politicians are so damn dangerous, because they're not like anyone else. They can use the power of the state to enforce whatever they damn well please. And the only checks that they have is what we will put up with. And this British public have been so compliant to this government for so long that they're getting pretty much what they asked for. Not by request, but by implication. See, if dishonest people have access to this much power, then we, the people, we are living in a dangerous time. And it's never been more dangerous. I'm 59 now, and I've never been so frightened for the future because I've never seen anything like this. Ayn Rand, the philosopher and novelist, wrote, the only power that any government has is the power to crack down on criminals. Well, if there aren't enough criminals, the government will make them. It declares so many things to be a crime that it becomes impossible to live a normal life without breaking the laws. Now, she wrote that about 1958. She was an ex-Russian. She had escaped from Russia, went to America and hey press. So she saw the creeping socialism that was coming out of Russia and Nazi Germany and creeping over into the American colleges and universities. And it didn't happen only in America, it's happened here. So the universities and the intelligentsia have been the breeding ground for this Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, socialist Nazi state, which is now just appearing above the horizon. It's been underground for now, but it's coming out. The mask is falling off, ironically, and the Nazi state is revealing itself. In September, Boris will make it illegal to enter a nightclub without a COVID passport. I wrote that a couple of days ago, but we've already seen extended from nightclub to churches and any other place where people are likely to gather. Well, can you name a number of places where people are likely to gather? Because I can name thousands. In a single word, it's outside your own house. Outside, that's where people are likely to gather, and you won't be allowed out unless you've had your jabs. But it won't stop at the jab, because the jab is just a precursor. Pretty soon it will be your carbon footprint and how much meat you eat, and your personal choices in terms of the purchases that you buy, whether you buy too much plastic. And every single aspect of your life will be under the scrutiny of the government. And bit by bit, you will have zero freedom if this is allowed to stand. There we are. Boris will make it illegal to enter a crowded venue. Now, that phrase, crowded venue, is extremely vague. How many crowded venues could you dream up? What constitutes a crowded venue? A supermarket, a public toilet? We're on a dangerous slope, guys. This is the world that corrupt scientists and corrupt politicians are creating for us. These people in government are showing every sign of being dishonest, and therefore they are very dangerous individuals. The government itself has become a very dangerous infection on the society it's supposed to be serving, but is in fact trying to dominate. We need to protect ourselves from this danger, and we must replace this corrupted government and this corrupted band of so-called sage scientists, which aren't, because they're not using the scientific method, they're using psychops. The only science they're using is psychology to terrorize. This is state-sponsored terrorism coming from the sage and the government. We need to replace these people with a better alternative. Now, we've already shown you this diagram before if you've been with us before, but you can see that the big picture of politics is to make sure that politicians protect our freedoms. And then, and only then, are they able then, rightly, to turn their attention to health, economics, education, all the other things that the government is supposed to do. But the primary purpose of a government is to protect our political freedom. And this is the very essence of what a government is for. To protect our political freedoms. And this is the very thing which is disappearing in front of our eyes like a mist. And these people are mysterious. They're the bloody mistrons. They need to be taken down. There we are, I just read it there. The primary purpose of the government is to protect our freedoms. Governments who violate our rights are bad and they must be changed. I've come to the end because I overran that a little bit at the beginning. We are so close to losing all that we have taken for granted as a democracy, i.e. freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to associate, freedom to live your own life free from coercive power of the state. We are this close, and it's all come from a tiny, apparently insignificant, subcellular, submicroscopic entity called the COVID virus. And that is one virus out of millions of viruses. The viruses have always been here. There's nothing we can do about viruses, but there is something we can do about tyrannical governments. We can resist them at every step, and when they get too big for their boots, we've got to get rid of them. So that's what I suggest that we do. If you are listening to this and you're interested, then turn up at the next protest. It's time to get off your couch. This is the first time I'm going to get off the couch and march, because now is the time. If now isn't the time, when is? You see. So pick up your pitchforks, go to your biggest city, and make your voice heard, because we need to preserve our democracy. We need to preserve UK liberty. This is Chris Farmer signing out. Thank you very much.